recorded live.
Welcome to the Virtualization Security Roundtable podcast episode number 64, I believe, where today we'll be talking about the ROI or TCO of virtualization and cloud security. Today, our panelists consist of Michael Berman, who's the CTO of Catbird, the pioneer and industry leader in security and compliance for the virtual environment. Myself, Edward Haletke, a.k.a. TechSiWell in the VMware Communities Forum and author of the book VMware vSphere on Virtual Infrastructure Security, Securing the Virtual Environment, which is available on Amazon. And Tim Pearson is also joining us today. He is a contributing author to the book and owner of Data Century, Inc. and a leading trainer in virtualization security. Welcome, everybody. Our special guest panelist this week is Steve Kaplan, who is the Vice President of the virtualization practice for INX, a leading professional services firm in virtualization and unified communications. Welcome, Steve.
Thanks. I should put a plug in for my latest book, too, Cloud Computing with VMware vCloud Director, that I co-authored with John Aristide and Duncan Epping and a few other VMware guys.
Absolutely. We can plug books on this show. I have no problem. Actually, I have a copy of it sitting here myself. This is the Sage one, right?
What's that?
This is the Sage one, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's actually not too bad. I like it.
Oh, thanks.
Doesn't really cover security very much, though.
A pretty big chapter on security.
Well, okay. We'll talk about that one later. So the question we have for today, and this actually kind of dovetails nicely with the brouhaha happening over the new vSphere 5 licensing, and that is, how do you determine or measure ROI or TCO for virtualization security products, whether they're from VMware or third parties? So unlike other podcasts where we try to be very product agnostic, including our vendors our panelists, this is one where you get to talk about the ROI and TCO of your products. So, Steve, how would you define that in a virtualization security or cloud security space?
Well, I don't really look at the ROI or TCO necessarily of security. That's one of those areas that I've never tried to quantify. I always look at security as kind of a cost of doing business, and looking at security more as a component of a larger ROI. For instance, if you're thinking about moving to, let's say, a private cloud, and in order to do that, you have to implement some security aspects as your virtual machines start migrating around your environment and so on that you don't have today, just to move into that environment for compliance's sake or shareholder dictums, whatever it is. At that point, the cost of security really makes or breaks the entire project. So it's a component of the overall ROI. In terms of actually quantifying ROI or TCO for individual security components, I know some manufacturers do that and do that quite well, but it's nothing I've really gotten involved in at that level.
Okay. So you think it's the cost of doing business?
I look at it like insurance, and you can justify insurance and say, I'm going to get this return on my investment, but it really isn't. At best, it's cost avoidance. So the return from putting a security system in place is really the cost avoidance from having some type of a breach or security disaster, and not only the cost of remediating that, but all the negative publicity and potentially shut down the business. So that's really the cost. It's in my mind, it's more of a return angle.
I always refer to it as more of a cost or a tax we all must pay to have a more secure product. Just like we don't like paying taxes, but we have to pay them. If I could figure out a way to get around paying taxes, I probably would. But unfortunately, I can't unless I want to share the jail cell with Big Bubba. I don't want to do that either. So we all pay the tax. It's just something you're going to have to do in this day and age.
Well, paying the tax for secure products is one thing, but choosing a product that fits a security need. Unfortunately, what I see in the industry is everybody thinks that there's one product that does the whole mix.
Yeah.
and therefore, you have an IDS competing with a firewall, competing with an ANA, an authorization and authentication suite altogether.
Therefore, they're wrong, as we've talked about, Ed.
And Michael, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't want to argue with any of my esteemed colleagues. I think these are all acceptable points to make. As a vendor, however, I'm not satisfied with that.
And actually, as an architect, I'm not satisfied with that either.
Yeah, I mean, when I've had to sit in the CISO's chair and I was trying to get, my boss to spend money on a product, I was looking for more than, it's a tax you have to pay or it's insurance. Because, I think for the most part, the CIO always got that, right? But where I really had support was when I could find business or operational improvements from the technology I was proposing. And that's where I think we need to get smarter about the security ROI. We started talking about this here at Capward with respect to VMware's ROI calculator, right? That, a VMware says and, Hyper-V says, you go to these calculators, right? And you get this huge ROI from virtualization. Well, what if there's stuff you're not virtualizing because you are concerned about sensitive data or you are concerned about mission criticality? And then we started with this argument of, and we kind of heard Moritz talk about this the other day, when he talked about accelerate and amplify. So that wasn't the terms we used at Capward because we weren't as smart, but, we were talking about, you could virtualize more with security than without because there were these workloads you might not have otherwise virtualized, and so therefore our ROI became the VMware ROI, which is huge, right? Mm-hmm. But even that, as a vendor, I'm not satisfied with. I think that argument's a good argument. Don't get me wrong, but the argument I'm really hunting for still goes back to the argument I had to make to my boss, in the large enterprise, which was, boss, we have these problems because we don't have security. Not, we're getting attacked or not, I'm afraid we're going to get attacked, but because we don't have good security, the network goes down or SAP goes down. And what does that cost us? And it wasn't because they go down because they're being attacked, although, for all I knew they were because we had we had nothing, we didn't have any decent security tools to know. No one like this. But we knew that, our configuration management wasn't so great. We knew our change management wasn't so great. And so I was able to sell to my boss a whole suite of security tools, but I was able to do it by camping on ITIL and operational excellence, right? You need this tool not only because it's insurance, not only because it can block some types of attacks, but it'll help us be good IT people because it's going to enforce access control and configuration management on IT staff. And lo and behold, when we start doing that, the systems are up more and they're crashing less. And network bandwidth is being utilized better because less of it's being used for porn. I mean, it was just, magical stuff started to happen, right? And I think you can make that argument most of the time. It's just you have to do a little bit more research, and it's a little bit harder. And fear always sells, so we often go to that in the security business. But I as a vendor, I'm not satisfied with that. So I think this was sort of saying in the beginning of the podcast. This is the Shameless Commerce podcast. I'm really not trying to push Capward here. I'm really just saying, look, we as vendors and we as security professionals, we can do better than selling on fear. Not that we should ignore that because attacks are happening every day, and that is a reason to have good security. Sorry, go ahead. I'll stop. Go ahead.
Shameless Commerce Division.
No, I'm not. I'm trying not. It's not a Capward per se. I mean, anybody should be able to do this, right?
Absolutely. So, Steve, tell me, when you're an architect, I'm an architect in virtual environments. I don't just do security, and you actually have to think about security more when you start talking about these. In the larger environments, are people just accepting the security and saying, well, we got to go and do it, let's just pick a product or pick a suite of products to do?
Well, first of all, I just better clarify, I'm not a hands-on architect. I'm more of a theoretical architect and approaching it from a business perspective. That being said, I get involved with a lot of different customers and prospects who are implementing various stages of enterprise virtualization projects. And I think really the most common thing we find is that customers are still applying security the way they did in their physical environments to the virtual one. And that actually creates a lot of problems, and is probably one of the
pretty
big...
broken, isn't it? Yeah. Why are you saying that's broken? Because I know why I think it's broken. But what's your...
just firewall appliances and intrusion detection appliances and processes and VPNs and so on don't work as well if in a highly mobile environment as they do in a static physical one.
Well, and unless you have the proper equipment.
Right.
With Cisco VMFX, if you have a UCS infrastructure and you're using VMFX or they're calling it Quantum or whatever they're calling it, your VMs are right on your Nexus switches anyways. They're sitting on the 7000. I can be authoritative there. We're talking about all that, and then I'm back to physical security. I'm back to the physical nature of IDS, IPSs. So
agreed, but if you're even getting into the UCS, you're already starting to take more of a virtual mindset to the architecture, and the problem is that a lot of organizations, from the architecture, from the hosting platforms, to the network configurations, to the management tools, to the processes they use, all are still, have the vestiges of their physical environment, and as a whole, they prove to be ineffective in a virtual one, and that's why the majority of data centers out there are in this quagmire called virtual stall or VM stall or virtualization stall, whatever you want to term it. But basically, they get stuck, typically south of the 50% virtualized mark.
Okay.
We were just talking about this in the community, the VM community the other day with the thread on virtual IDS.
Yes.
And I made several points about why you could not do this in the physical.
And then all those points are perfectly legitimate. And it's agility, the fact that the data is never staying still.
Well, then I'm asking you, though, but you made an assertion just a moment ago about VMFX from
the fabric
Cisco.
extender for VMs. So effectively it takes the Palo Adapter's fabric extender technology and extends it directly to the VM. So now your VM literally is on your 61, your Northbridge switch, which means that it's no longer inside the virtual machines.
Yeah, but what about the math I did on inter-VM, inter-chassis traffic?
Yeah, but this actually covers that because in the UCS, all inter-VM traffic now goes out to the 6100.
Right, but are you asserting that will not cause bandwidth throttling?
Oh, I don't assert anything like that at all.
Okay.
Not at all. I mean, I think if I was to do that, I think that we will need to have. I think you would need to have more pipe to do it properly, to do it justice. I agree with you on that. It's
I don't think the pipe exists. That's what I do a little bit of math, and this is like a whole other call. You're right. Let's get Brad back in.
We could beat up Brad on that one.
Well, he'll know more than I do. I just did math, here for our own use at Catbird, right?
Yeah, And when you start talking about that, then if you start talking about implementing virtualization security the way we were talking about, one of those four methods, either hairpinning out, now you're doubling your bandwidth, which will actually double your costs because now you actually have to possibly buy more nodes more networking, which eventually means more nodes or more ports on a switch.
That's right.
To handle that load. If I'm doing it inside the VM, if I'm doing it as an appliance inside the VM, I may actually need more core to put towards that appliance to do the heavy lifting for me.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, so this is where I think the argument works in our favor.
Now we have a direct cost analysis to that. I can buy core. I can buy networking. I can buy, if I'm doing it inside of VM Safe Net, I actually still need more core for the slow path appliances. You know.
Yeah, no, this is what I said to a large customer of ours. They want to know, like, I'm putting together this blades, and what's the security overhead if I put a capper per blade, and that. And I'll say this here. I told them 15%. Go out and buy. If you were going to buy 100 blades, buy 115 or 120, because that's what you're going to find you need to run capper plus the workload you were expecting to run. And he was going, well, you do realize what 15 blades cost, don't you? And I said, and I turned around and I said, well, it's going to be a lot cheaper than any other way you can do it. So yes, I do know what 15 blades cost.
Or if you have 8-core sockets now, you just make sure you have blades that can handle 12-core sockets. And you go.
I know, but I've heard a lot of people say that there's a diminishing return. Anyway, that's like another call. I don't know where the optimum number of sockets or cores are per blade, Ed.
Yeah,
I think VMware made it quite clear it's all about memory.
Yeah, well.
Right, I think you're right.
The systems are just so damn fast right now that it's all about memory.
Yeah, I think you're right. That's obvious if you read between the lines of this licensing, right?
Yeah. So, Stephen, what do you think about that when we start talking about a 15% overhead for something like this? And that's just one product.
Oh, yeah, but I do it all.
Yeah, you do part of it.
Again, I think there are some good points made that if the security elements are going to let you be successful in the virtualization project, and that the success may be defined by being able to virtualize your tier 1 or mission critical or DMZ type applications, your regulated servers, then that's you have to measure the benefits of that and the economic and other benefits of that versus the 15% overhead cost for the the blade component of the security product or one.
Yeah, I mean the other point I made, right? If you went the physical fashion route, so my product is I'll say IDS IPS on steroids. It does a bunch of other stuff, but even if all it did was IDS IPS, the IDS IPS appliance to protect 100 blades is not a cheap appliance. And when you do that math, buy 15 more blades or go out and buy something from Juniper or Cisco to do the equivalent on the physical traffic, even if you could pretend that you could do it in the physical, that appliance from those guys was a lot more expensive than 15 more blades.
Yeah, I look at that as more of a TCO type of a mathematical approach, so basically comparing two different product-oriented approaches, and you can put in the whole life cycle of operating them and warranting them and so on, and comparing those two, which is really a very different approach from ROI, which is what are the overall big picture technology or benefits and savings of implementing a certain type of technology.
Yeah.
So if we
one of the things I'm seeing. Go ahead.
Hold on. So if we need security to implement those tier 1 apps, so then therefore the security would be tied to the ROI of implementing those, virtualizing those tier 1 apps.
Yeah, or potentially even the entire environment if not being able to virtualize those apps for whatever reason is going to stall the entire initiative, which it does.
It absolutely does, and I think that's where we're sitting right now. But when you start talking about virtualization security, I may take a Catbird, I may take a Reflex, I may take a Juniper product, or even the VMware vShield products. And we're just talking VMware and a couple of those cross boundaries into other hypervisors. So I may need I need a network security device of some sort, or maybe more than one. I need a authorization authentication device, a la HITRUST or something of that nature. And I may also need a DLP solution of some sort, whether that is doing it through a security as a service or if that's doing it as a built-in product. I also may need I'll probably need an antivirus product, mainly because almost every compliance regulation requires me to have something of that. I may need a web application firewall on top of that because of PCI and other compliant requirements. So when I look at it all, there's not one product that does everything. So if I start layering all these products on top of each other, and some work together, some don't, the big picture becomes, it gets very expensive very quickly to say I need 6 products.
Right, but the other thing I'm trying to avoid is 6 products per blade. So
exactly.
I think
you don't want that.
The thing I'm trying to think about, as much as I, preach that the perimeter is dead.
Well, you and I both agree to that one.
Well, right, but there are tools that work just fine outside, right, the blades versus inside, where I'm claiming there are some things that now only work inside the blades.
Absolutely.
And I think, it may be that the identity and access management, right, you don't need that. You don't need an instance of that per blade, right?
Absolutely not.
Right, and probably, and I can't say this for sure, but in many cases you may not need a WAF per blade either.
Well, that
right?
depends on that would depend on how you do your WAF. If you're doing it using VM safe type technologies, you absolutely do.
You do, but I'm saying if the purpose of a WAF is to filter traffic going to and fro the internet, I am pretty confident that most of us know how to, route internet traffic such that it crosses the WAF.
Oh, absolutely. But then you start thinking about a multi-lobed approach because...
Well, yeah. Now, I'm not saying there aren't other architectures where you'd want to distribute the WAF and do things like that. I think you're right. But I'm just saying not all these tools...
Just so everybody knows it's on the podcast, this is a conversation that Michael and I have been having on the VMware Communities, one of the VMware Communities Security and Compliance Forum about...
For years.
For quite a while. But right now... We're talking about different...
Oh, sorry, did I say that out loud?
Yeah, you did.
You
did. The voices in your head are leaking, Tim.
So we've been talking about different ways of looking at architectures, and I came up with one I call the dumbbell approach.
I like it.
If this is for in a cloud, I have my big enterprise, I have a small pipe, I have a big enterprise, so I have a dumbbell, and I have to secure that. But I'm also thinking about, now if we stretch that out, and when we start talking about a real cloud environment, it's more like an amoeba or a multi-lobed approach, where I may have my enterprise going through a small pipe to a SaaS provider, now to another pipe to my hot site, now to my another pipe to my hybrid cloud, so I can move workloads over there. I now have all these different approaches. So the big question is if I'm looking at the dumbbell, I simplified myself. I'm a hybrid cloud. And when you start thinking about that, what would be the ROI TCO of that? I mean, wouldn't it be 2x almost at least? I mean, the total cost of security in that case would be twice what your enterprise would be. Or are we talking maybe it's 1.5? I don't know.
Well, here's the argument, right? So when we started talking about this, and you made the observation, which I liked. So let's just recap something. So Ed made a couple of applications in the community forum. One of them was that you need to start putting your security near the data.
Absolutely.
Yes.
But the reason why you have to say you need to start putting your security near the data is because people haven't been. But I would argue that the reason why no one has decent security and everybody can get hacked by a 15-year-old who has the ability to use Google to find hacking tools is because, security is so badly broken as it's been typically deployed, even by people who should have known better. And one of the big failures is we don't have security near the data. And if this new model, whether it's virtualization security or cloud security, whatever you talk about, if this new model forces people to put security near their data, then now, finally we might not be wasting 100% of our money on security. I mean, look at all these guys who got hacked. I mean, do you think for a second Sony didn't spend a few $1 million on network and IT security? I'm sure they spent tons of money on it, and it was uselessly spent. So whatever they spent
was
on
the right thing.
Right.
And
and so basically, if this new model, Ed, you were just saying you're going to have to spend 2x. Well, if by spending 2x, I now have effective security that actually protects my data and keeps my systems running, then that was money well spent.
Okay. But do I really need an IDS, IPS, or effectively what I need is a sensor of some sort right there, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to. I'm here on this call representing a particular vendor, and I'm free to do so in this particular podcast. But no, I mean, the first step is you got to have a sensor. Whether that sensor can enforce access controls or block traffic or whatever, no, I don't think I don't have to make that point. But if you don't have visibility, you've got nothing.
Okay, I agree. Does anybody agree with that one?
Ed, you and I down here when you were in Dallas, we were talking about the data flows. And the data flows, basically we established that if you don't know how the data is flowing through your infrastructure, how could you possibly learn how to protect it?
Exactly.
And Ed showed me some stuff. I tell you guys, I had to stop and get a drink. It was like, oh my gosh. Hang on.
Just glow in the dark. But so when we start talking about the total cost of ownership of security needs to be measured against what? It's not a return on the investment. It's, as Steve, you said, it was insurance. Of what would you classify insurance of being against what? What are we talking about here?
Insurance against downtime, against attacks, against all the repercussions that accompany, the security breaches.
And ultimately against the company being shut down because of that breach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, potentially.
I like the piece where you said insurance against downtime.
Hold on a second. One person at a time.
Go ahead.
Michael?
I was going to say one interesting thing that when you think about it is that insurance companies, as far as I know, don't insure organizations for security of any type. I mean, it's you think that maybe they can mitigate the risk among a lot of different organizations, but obviously it's a lot less expensive to put in, systems, and as you mentioned, Ed, typically multiple systems that will give you at least a certain level of security than trying to just share the risk.
Okay. Michael, you were saying something?
Well, he said something that resonated for me when he said insurance against downtime. So I'm now going insurance against downtime, insurance against, wasted resources, right? I mean, that's where I see a lot of this happening, too, is that a lack of a good security management system, right? And this is the big security management, which is availability, integrity, and confidentiality. You have all this wasted stuff that occurs, because you're not keeping an eye on any of the balls. And good security tools help you do that.
Okay.
And so he was right, insurance against downtime, because I claim a good security system improves your availability. And what I hate having is this discussion where someone says, well, I've never been hacked, so therefore I don't need security, or I don't need any more security than I've got. And usually when someone says they've never been hacked, that is a warning bell for me. That means their security is for crap, right? Because anybody with decent security knows they're being hacked all the time.
Well, anybody with half a thought on that one will actually think that is the truth, instead of thinking as you're not. I always look at my environment as, I'm about to be hacked or I have been hacked, and I now need to find out what's happening inside. And I do the security myself in my environments, not just to test out and play with all the nice tools all the vendors have, but also to make sure that I know what's going on. If I don't know what's going on, how do I know what to protect? The insurance aspect of of security tools, it makes no difference if I don't know what's going on. What is normal versus abnormal? I still need to know that. What do I expect to be there versus what actually is there? And networking is fine. Networking is just a small part of that, right?
You're referring to a baseline, establishing your baseline.
Establishing a baseline of what I think. But in a virtual environment, that baseline is going to continually change. As I add more VMs, as I take VMs away, as I move them around my hybrid cloud, a baseline for inside my enterprise versus inside the other lobe of other end of my dumbbell will be different.
Right. I mean, how you characterize an attack is important, or how you might then determine what attributes are indicators or leading indicators of an attack. That's tricky. I'll say that's something we spend more time trying to think about here than other things. But that's the point. One of the things I really like about the virtualization is the ability to really instrument everything that's going on, because the hypervisor is really rich in providing that data to any product. CPU data, bandwidth data, storage data, all sorts of very interesting things that you can now instrument and monitor, because the hypervisor knows it all.
Absolutely. So, Mike, we haven't heard from you about anything. You got anything you want to add to that?
Geez.
Talk about what you can talk about.
Well, actually, I was going to ask Mike to answer this.
Go ahead.
I actually think that DLP needs to be inside the blade too, but that was just my opinion. What do you think?
I think we're rapidly approaching the point where there's going to be multiple security VMs running on every ESX host. Your point about the 15% penalty, I'm assuming that's 15% in a situation where it's being fully utilized. Those times when it's not being fully utilized, I'm actually getting to use those other, say, 15 blades.
Yeah.
I think the DLP stuff that's built into vShield is going to introduce DLP concepts to a lot more people than we have traditionally introduced those concepts to. You're going to have a lot of IT admins going, oh, this is pretty cool.
I think a lot of the security people are going to be going, this is very cool. I mean...
Yeah, but the DLP technology's been around for a long time.
And it's actually been only at the edge.
Well,
it tended to be a big appliance in somewhere.
Yeah, but it's an appliance somewhere that manages a whole bunch of different DLP choke points. And one of those DLP choke points up until a couple of days ago was running a DLP agent within the virtual machine itself. That's been around for quite some time. And that does a whole lot more than what the DLP does in vShield.
So both are probably going to still be required.
Yeah, if you look at the DLP that's being done in vShield, all it's doing is scanning a virtual machine, finding a file that will say contains credit card information, and then alerting. It's not doing any remediation. It's not deleting the file. The only remediation you can do, and it's not built in, is to isolate that VM from the network, and that's it.
Well, it's also not a bad thing.
No, it's not a bad thing. It's a great first step. It's good enough for an awful lot of people, and we all know that a lot of companies have made a great living by being good enough. Microsoft, but yeah, but when you want to then step it up to, well, I want to find the file and encrypt the file with the user's key, because maybe that it is valid to be there, but it should be at least encrypted. Now you start getting into a whole lot more policies, and that's where I think you'll see that type of capability being addressed later. So today, if you were to install the RSA DLP, and I hate to do a product plug, if you install the RSA DLP agent within a virtual machine, you can take care of those remediation capabilities. It'll find the file, report the file, check the policy, and then, do whatever the policy says should be done to that file. It can, disable your cut and paste buffer. It can ensure that if I plug a USB stick in, that files with this type of information can go on the USB stick, but files with that type of information cannot. All of that stuff is much finer grained. The stuff within vShield is a lot more coarse, but like I said, for many people, will be more than enough.
And not only that, if you think about the average load on most machines today, I'm more likely to be eating up memory than I am to be eating up CPU. Especially if you have 6 and 8 core CPU sockets. I'm core to burn, assigning a couple of cores for security per one of those appliances. I'm more than willing to do that.
Yeah, I can't talk about some of the implementation details until after the NDA, but what you will have is one security VM scanning all VMs on that host.
Very much like how Trend Micro does their stuff.
It's exactly the same way.
The same API.
Yes.
Same API. That's what I thought. So what that ends up being is now, because it's using that API, now I have to worry about storage.
How so?
Am I burning more of my storage to do the scan because I'm actually reading more or doing more with my storage?
Talking about more I/O ops?
Yeah. Do I have to now worry about I/O ops? Do I have to worry about latency? Do I have to worry about utilization that is different for bandwidth? Say if I have iSCSI, 1 gig iSCSI, this could be a problem. If I have 10 gig, it may not be. If I have 16 gig fiber, that probably won't be. But now I have to worry about buffer depths and stuff like that. So now what I've done by putting all the security in, I'm now switching I now have to put on a different hat as an architect and say, all this security, have I
comes with a cost.
My environment?
Well, it comes with a cost, but it's most likely, unless you were not doing it at all, you're probably going to have an incremental improvement, and at worst, it's a zero-sum game because you were, before you had AV in an appliance, you should have had, arguably, AV per VM.
Yeah.
And now that you're doing AV in an appliance, I am pretty confident, worst case, you were just doing the same number of I/O ops as you did before, and you're probably doing a lot less. I would suspect the DLP behavior is the same. Now, if you weren't doing DLP at all before, and now you're doing DLP, then yeah, you're doing more I/O ops than you were doing before.
And you're probably doing more I/O ops than you would if you're doing AV.
Probably, right?
Yeah.
Probably.
So when we start thinking about this, and Steve, you do this, you're kind of the theoretical architect here of us, actually, probably. When you start thinking about adding these in, do you architect more capability based on just adding in security?
Yeah, I think it completely is situational dependent. And in some cases, the answer would be yeah. Other cases, no. Other than perhaps through the process of it, of forcing people to think about it rather than have architecturally enabling.
So when we start talking about the architectures that you're talking about, where they may already have a huge number of a huge amount of bandwidth available to them for storage, for example. So this is not really a big add-on.
Yeah, if you look at like a V-block architecture, they're building in a lot of I/O apps for that.
Absolutely.
So I don't know. I don't know that Mike or I have to worry about our additional IOPS overhead.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I tell a lot of folks is forget about that, because we can sit here and come up with, it's going to add an additional 10%, oh my God, and then next year we're going to buy a new array that's going to run 500 times faster, or some other, and just
something
totally
ungodly,
and just totally negate the issue. And that's why I tell folks, when designing for your virtual environment, is designed to be as lightweight as possible, but let the infrastructure deal with some of the performance issues. So if we need, some number of IOs per second in order to run, well, that's no longer a security problem, in that I have to make sure my security appliance I have to go buy a NAS or some other sort of thing. I just say to the IT infrastructure architect, I need X number of IOs per second. And it's his responsibility to provide that level of assurance to me. And within VMware, I can set, guarantees of certain levels of performance on a per VM or per resource pool basis. And I get that stuff. And if the IT infrastructure says, wow, this is starting to cost me, I may have to upgrade my array, or I may have to buy some more blades. Well, that's built in. That's part of the IT infrastructure budget, and not necessarily the security budget.
That's true too. I love that. But I also make the point that trying to solve it with hairpins or other technologies, you'd spend more money doing it that way.
Oh yeah.
Probably not, and not do it at all,
and not be nearly as flexible.
Exactly. And the argument I was making, and one of the points I was making, is that what I love about being in the virtual appliance business is I am now on the right side of Moore's Law. I am no longer playing catch-up.
Yeah.
Right. My appliance is, every time somebody upgrades their CPU and pulls a blade out and puts a new blade in, I get that. Right. That helps me. And for all the guys who are outside in, their custom silicon and, trying to keep up with whatever they're doing with ASICs and VLSI, and, they're screwed. Mm-hmm. Every time there's a new rev out of AMD or Intel or God knows who else, right? NVIDIA may be getting into this, x86 business.
So my answer is just throw more systems at it.
That's right.
Buy more blades.
Scale.
Buying blade is not always the answer either. I mean, quite frankly, I recently made a decision to go to blades in my environment, and the cost of my enclosure is fairly expensive, but the cost of my blades was actually lower than the 2U boxes I was buying before.
Yeah, well, I think you're taking the point a little too literally. I don't necessarily mean buy more blades, but buy more CPU, buy more memory, buy more pieces, buy more pieces of hardware that contains CPU and memory, whatever way you want to spin it.
The people run
but it's no longer my issue.
Yeah, and people run a big data center, refresh 25% of their hardware every year.
Yeah.
Right?
And that 25% of the hardware is probably 50% faster than the hardware they just dumped.
Well, that's my point. That's the Moore's Law advantage that I'm now able to leverage, right? When I was in the business of having a hardware appliance and I had to rely on ASIC engineers or FPGA engineers to build stuff, I was always getting screwed by Intel, right?
Right, and now I can create affinity rules that say my security systems are more apt to run on those higher powered blades.
You can, and this is where at Capward we have these two components, and I'm sure it's pretty common in this industry, right? We have our appliance that runs out per blade, and we're really stingy there, right? That appliance uses 4 gigabytes of RAM. And we're really careful about how it behaves. But it reports back to a management council, and it's that provisioning of the management council where I tell people, okay, that's going to have 4 cores, and that's going to have this many IO ops because it's doing real-time event streaming and auditing of your entire environment. So that's the kind of thing where we have to talk about that, and that's exactly right. As they're upgrading the hardware, right, the security infrastructure gets to take advantage of that. And so your management council whether it's for DLP or for Catbird or for vShield or Reflex, you can take advantage of that new hardware.
Right. And I think to kind of wrap this all around into an ROI discussion, so we can get Steve back on the in the argument, is now you've created one. I don't want to use the term silo, but one tower of ROI that you can now start to measure, as opposed to, the multiple different appliances all over the place. And what's the ROI on buying an appliance? My ROI will end up being slightly cheaper over time if it's a virtual appliance running in the virtual infrastructure, because it's just another component of the virtual infrastructure.
Okay. So we're saying now
that brings up another point. Terramark was mentioning that they're going to be starting to offer these silos with everything that you need for a turnkey system, for your SQL server, for your Exchange server, for your all of the things in a silo. Just turn it on, it's yours. I thought that
Are they building that off of VApp?
No, actually, it's infrastructure as a service, if I'm not mistaken.
No, it's a VApp.
It's going to be VApp.
Well, that's what I'm wondering. Is it a VApp?
Probably a VApp.
Well, logically, it's a VApp, even if it isn't a VMware VApp, right? Because they're selling you the whole piece, right?
Well, they're saying the
For an
whole
application
silo,
stack.
is my understanding.
Right.
Yeah, and that's a VApp, whether it's a multiple machines or a single machine.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Whether it's a small V or a big V.
exactly. It's still multiples of it's your front, your middleware, and your database.
My point is, this is moving forward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And I asked this in the chat. What is the value of a resilient and secure data center that is 100% virtualized? Versus the data center that is not secure or resilient or 100% virtualized, right? Isn't there a huge ROI if we can drive it to 100%?
Yeah, absolutely. I think
But
so.
can you drive it to 100%? That's the big question.
Well, for the workload, Ed.
You can't if it's physical.
Well, you definitely can't if it's physical.
Yeah. You have a much better opportunity of driving it closer to 100% if it's virtual.
Well, I'm thinking about not only
When
I think about 100% virtualized, I don't think anybody will ever actually get there.
No, and that's my point.
Because I think about switches, I think about security appliances, I think.
No. I'm talking about the workload. And except for airline reservation systems and the few technologies the few things we can name, right? Well, and what? For the fact of the matter, right? I don't think Facebook is virtualized. Google is not. Well, Google is kind of on that edge of what you call virtualization. So the question is, ignoring these things that we don't know how to virtualize because of the things they do, why can't we virtualize everything else?
Yeah, well, we absolutely can. We have lots of customers that are 98, 99, 100% virtualized out there, good-sized organizations. We're talking about x86 servers anyway.
Right.
Okay. About how many?
If you're running it on an Intel CPU now, you can virtualize it.
Oh, just about every switch is running on an Intel CPU. But then you have the argument that, if I have a noisy neighbor, right, or I get attacked, there's always this argument, it's easier now to break through. I think that's bunk, personally. It's not easy.
It is bunk if you have virtualization security, and this is part of Maritz's and Steve Harrod's point. You can deal with this noisy neighbor problem. In fact, I claim you can deal with the noisy neighbor problem better if it's virtual than you could if it was physical.
And Mike, I think that's going to be a huge step forward in the virtualization industry as a whole when somebody is able to show that, not only is security in a virtual environment equivalent to a physical, but it's actually better. And not only better, but less expensive.
Well, we need to talk, because I say this every time I speak, because, I used to do a lot of pen testing years and years ago. And I always broke into the target, and every pen tester claims that, but we always broke in, and it was always because the target didn't know what they had. Their inventory was bad. And so we found a system that wasn't protected as well or wasn't patched as well, and that was our way in. And with virtualization, I always make the point, I've got a really good inventory. In fact, I make the assertion that if I can trust the hypervisor, it is infeasible for there to be a VM that the hypervisor does not know about. So for the first time in my life as a security guy, I've got a good inventory. And at least with the stuff that's virtual, I believe that's true.
And for availability concerns, hypervisors provide me better availability. So I got A already covered up CIA, but I don't necessarily have integrity and confidentiality covered yet.
Well, if you're not buying the right security products, and I claim they have to be virtualized security products, you don't have confidentiality covered, and you probably don't have integrity covered either.
And I think the right security products depend on what you're trying to do with them.
Of course, and then ultimately, and this is the point I made at the beginning of the call, if you don't have the right security products, you don't have availability covered either. So you end up, when you really knit this together, and I think that's the ROI conversation in a nutshell, is that when you've got the right mix of products that assure availability, integrity, and confidentiality, right, that mix has to include, traditional security tools. But in including those tools, you're going to have whatever number of nines of availability your business needs to run. And the ROI argument becomes real easy, because what's the cost of not being in business?
And then you have, quite frankly, I think the key is not virtualization security tools per se, but visibility into the virtualized environment so that you can get your good inventories. That visibility, regardless of tool, is going to be the key. And as we move to this dumbbell type of architecture or multi-lobed architecture for clouds, having my security with my VM or close to it or close to my data is going to be absolutely important. At least that's what I would take out of this conversation. And then the ROI of that, or the total cost of ownership of security, is just insurance in a lot of ways.
Yeah, but I reject that last part. I think everything you said was okay up until the insurance part.
Insurance is just another way of mitigating it. You're just shifting the risk to somebody else.
Now, insurance doesn't mitigate this problem. It doesn't shift risk. What it does is that I have to pay for it somehow.
Sure it does. It shifts risk.
No, but the claim I'm trying to make is that security allows me to run my data center better.
Okay.
And that has a lot of value.
I would agree with that. I'm able to virtualize a lot more with good security. So it's time for last thoughts. So we're going to start with Michael today. What's your last thoughts?
Is that Michael Berman or Mike Foley? I guess I'm Michael, right?
You're Michael, and we have a Mike.
Yeah, okay. I really just said my last thought. My thought is, as security professionals, it's important that we include insurance and mitigation of risk as part of the value of security. But I think it may be more important, especially in this new virtual world, that we also sell security through real ROI, around effectiveness and excellence in data center management. And whether that's adding another 9 to the 3.9 data center, or adding another 100 blades and virtualizing 99.9% of your possible workload, I think that's got to be part of the argument, because I think it's true, and it's a much more valuable argument to make.
Mm-hmm.
Steve, you have some last thoughts?
Yeah, just real quick. One was a post that Chris Hoff wrote about 4 years ago, where it talks about the ROI, the reduction of risk on investment. And I think that's a pretty appropriate term. The other is something interesting that I noticed today. That the New York Stock Exchange in conjunction with EMC and VMware, has set up a capital market community platform, which is essentially a kind of we haven't talked much about the public cloud today and all the security issues that accompany that, but they've taken an interesting approach in the sense that it's a secure, high-speed connectivity, and it's limited to members only, and so it really is using cloud architecture, public cloud architecture, but in a
community
way. Community cloud. Except community is usually defined as different organizations sharing their individual private
gated community.
Gated community.
Yeah, so this has a lot of appeal, I think, and I think we're going to see a lot of examples happening in other industries in healthcare and government and so on as well.
And not only that, the capital markets community platform, I think that's what they call it, handles jurisdictional issues dealing with cloud by having one per stock exchange. So there's one near New York, there's one near London, there's one near Hong Kong. And the data is just not shared between them except what is allowed to be shared according to the compliance. So they take their security very, very seriously over there. The question then becomes is, do they use any of these tools to do it that we've talked about? It's another story. Anything else to add, Steve?
That's it.
Okay. Very interesting. I agree, a lot of that. I'll say my little bit, then go on to the others, is that I think total cost of ownership of security is more than just one tool. It is a suite of tools to secure your entire environment. It's the end-to-end security that we need to think about, and have the IDS vendors compete against IDS vendors, the ANA compete against ANA, and DLP compete against DLP. When you start talking about what to buy, you need to look at everything. You can't just say, I'm going to just buy one tool today. That's going to secure me. No, it's the whole picture. And then that folds into making sure that your environments are architected for that. And in a lot of cases, you don't have to change anything. In some cases, you may.
Ed, do you think there ever will be one tool?
No. That's my opinion, is no. I think some will get close, but you cannot be a jack of all trades and master of none. You have to be a master of something to do security well in that space.
I also make the diversity argument, right?
Exactly.
If you only have one security tool and that security tool fails, you're done. So you have to have defense in depth requires more than one.
Defense in depth.
Defense in depth. Mike Foley, do you have anything you would like to add?
Yeah, people don't call me Michael unless they're yelling at me.
Okay.
Goes for my mother. I think there's a lot of uncertainty and doubt in the market right now around virtualization and security. I think because it brings new ways of doing things, and most security folks like to keep things the way they've always done it. Unfortunately, the bad guys are always thinking of new ways. So what security and virtualization is really going to give us, and especially from an ROI standpoint, is better consistency, better visibility into what's going on, provided you protect the virtualization layer. And I think, it's going to be, there's going to be a whole bunch of new capabilities that I think a lot of folks haven't even thought of yet. And like you said, there's not going to be one tool. There's going to be a number of tools. But what is going to be common across a lot of the tools is the exploitation of the virtualization layer to get the work done.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Anybody else have anything to add?
Yeah, I'd like to add something we didn't even talk about in here, is basically raising the security awareness through some kind of training, through some kind of education. I mean, that's probably more important than anything we've talked about.
Yeah, I had that conversation with someone earlier today when I was talking about, I was talking with one customer who their practices around virtualization and security curled my toes and raised the hair on the back of my neck. It was scary. And they were like, but this is the way we've always done it. and they're applying old school ways of doing things to a new environment, and they were not protecting the virtualization layer at all.
Just a small amount of money that they would spend on bringing their people up to speed would save them huge amounts of money later on.
Oh, well, let's look at where the interest in attacking is today is at the application level, because almost anyone, like you had mentioned, can go to Google, find some script, and go off and go run it against people. What happens when the target becomes the virtual infrastructure layer? That is akin to releasing the keys to my locked data center.
Right.
And that's a hell of a lot more scary than compromising just an application.
And that happens today.
Yeah.
So, anybody else? If not, thank you.
Michael, you have anything to say?
Thank you, everybody, for attending. Steve, thank you very much. It was an interesting conversation.
Sure, thank you.
Appreciate it, guys.
See you tomorrow, Edward.
Michael, I'll get in touch.